The dust cloud announced the train's arrival before the whistle ever did, and Yates Caldwell felt his heart hammer against his ribs as the locomotive screeched to a halt at the Belmont, Nevada depot on that scorching August afternoon in 1882. He stood on the weathered platform, hat in his calloused hands, watching passengers disembark with their trunks and carpetbags. His blue cotton shirt stuck to his back from the relentless sun, but he barely noticed the heat. Somewhere on that train was Adelaide Thorne, the woman whose letters had given him hope after 3 lonely years of working his ranch alone. Her photograph, creased from being carried in his pocket, showed a pretty woman with dark hair and serious eyes. But photographs captured so little of what a person truly was. The first passengers off were miners heading to the silver camps, then a family with squalling children, a salesman with his sample cases. Yates searched each face, his pulse quickening with every passing moment. What if she had changed her mind? What if she had gotten off at Reno instead, too frightened to continue? Then he saw her. She appeared at the top of the train steps, one gloved hand gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles showed white through the thin fabric. Her travel dress was a dusty brown calico, practical but well made, and her dark hair was pinned beneath a modest bonnet. She was trembling so hard he could see it even from where he stood 15 feet away. Her eyes darted across the platform, taking in the rough wooden buildings, the mountains rising stark and barren in the distance, the handful of people waiting. When her gaze finally landed on him, she froze completely. Yates walked forward slowly, not wanting to startle her further. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had expected, perhaps 22 or 23 to his 28 years. Her face was pale beneath the travel dust, and those brown eyes that had seemed serious in the photograph now looked terrified. Adelaide Thorne. His voice came out rougher than he intended. She nodded, unable to speak, still trembling like a leaf in a storm wind. He wanted to say something eloquent, something that would ease her fear, but standing there looking at this brave, frightened woman who had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, only the truth came to his lips. He stepped closer, near enough to smell the lavender water she wore, and spoke softly so only she could hear. "I have been waiting for you." The simple words seemed to unlock something in her. She drew in a shaky breath, and though the trembling did not stop entirely, she managed to descend the last 2 steps. Her carpetbag slipped from her other hand and hit the platform with a thud. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not think I would be this frightened." Yates bent to retrieve her bag, then offered his arm. "You have nothing to apologize for. You are the bravest woman I have ever met, coming all this way." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he saw her taking in his sun-weathered face, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow from a bad fall when he was 19, the earnestness in his expression. Something in her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "Your letters made it seem less frightening," she said, placing her hand on his arm with obvious hesitation. "But letters and reality are quite different things." "They are," he agreed, leading her toward where his wagon waited. "But we have time. The ranch is an hour from town. That gives us time to talk before you have to make any final decisions." She stopped walking. "Final decisions? But I came here to marry you. The arrangement was made." Yates turned to face her fully. "Adelaide, if you take one look at the ranch and decide this is not the life you want, I will buy you a ticket back east on tomorrow's train. No questions, no hard feelings. I want a wife who wants to be there, not one who feels trapped." Her eyes widened, and for the first time he saw something other than fear in them. Surprise, perhaps, or cautious hope. "That is very generous. It is only fair." He resumed walking, and she moved with him. My wagon is just here. I brought blankets to sit on. The road is rough." As he helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands briefly circling her waist, he felt how thin she was beneath the layers of clothing. The trembling was still there too. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. The wagon lurched forward, and Adelaide grabbed the seat edge to steady herself. They rode in silence for the first few minutes, leaving the small cluster of buildings that made up Belmont behind them. The landscape stretched out in shades of brown and gold, sagebrush and scrub grass dotting the valley floor. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. "Is it always this empty?" Adelaide finally asked, her voice small. "Mostly. There are ranches scattered about, but you can go days without seeing another soul sometimes. Is that going to be a problem?" She considered the question seriously. "I do not know yet. Philadelphia was very crowded, but it was also very lonely." Something in her tone made him glance over. She was staring straight ahead, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You want to tell me about it?" "My story is not particularly interesting. My father died when I was 17. My mother followed 2 years later. I had an aunt who took me in, but she made it clear I was a burden. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, it seemed like a chance for something different." She paused, then added quietly, "A chance to matter to someone." Yates felt something tighten in his chest. "You will matter here, Adelaide. I promise you that." She looked at him then, searching his face for deception and finding none. "Why did you send for a bride? Surely there are women in Nevada." "A few, but most are already spoken for or working in the saloons, and that is not what I want. I want a partner, someone to build a life with." He hesitated, then continued. "My parents died in a wagon accident 6 years ago, left me the ranch and not much else. I have been working it alone, and it is a hard, lonely life. I thought maybe with the right woman it could be something more." "What do you raise?" "Cattle." "Some cattle, mostly horses. I have a good eye for horseflesh, and the mines always need animals. It is not a fortune, but it is a decent living." The wagon jolted over a particularly rough section of road, and Adelaide was thrown against his side. She righted herself quickly, apologizing, but Yates had felt the warmth of her even through the layers of fabric, and it made him acutely aware of her presence. "How much further?" she asked. "About 40 minutes. "Are you doing all right?" She nodded, though the trembling had not entirely ceased. "I think I am still trying to convince myself this is real. Yesterday I was in Sacramento at a boarding house. Last week I was in Philadelphia. Now I am in the middle of Nevada about to see the place that might become my home. It must feel like a dream. More like I stepped off the edge of the world and I am still falling." Yates understood that feeling more than she knew. He had felt it when his parents died, when he realized he was suddenly alone with a ranch to run and no idea if he could manage it. But he had managed, and he thought Adelaide had that same stubborn strength in her, buried beneath the fear. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when the ranch finally came into view. It was not much to look at, Yates knew. A simple 2-room cabin made of logs with a covered porch, a barn that needed new paint, a few outbuildings and corrals holding a dozen horses. But the setting was beautiful, nestled in a valley with a creek running through it and cottonwood trees providing shade. Adelaide did not say anything as the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. She just stared, taking it all in. Yates climbed down and came around to help her, lifting her by the waist and setting her gently on the ground. She swayed slightly, stiff from the journey. "Let me show you inside," he said. The cabin was clean at least. He had spent the previous 3 days scrubbing every surface until his hands were raw. The main room held a stone fireplace, A rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair his mother had brought from Missouri, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. The second room was small, containing only a bed with a patchwork quilt, a trunk, and a washstand. It was sparse, but it was neat and well maintained. Adelaide walked through slowly, running her fingers along the table edge, looking at the curtains he had hung himself. When she reached the bedroom, she stopped in the doorway but did not enter. "This would be your room," Yates said from behind her. "I sleep in the barn." She turned quickly. "The barn? But this is your home. It would not be proper us sharing the cabin before we are married. The barn is comfortable enough. I fixed up the tack room with a cot." Something shifted in her expression again, that same surprise mixed with what might have been relief. "You really meant it, about giving me time to decide." "I did. You can stay here, get a feel for the place and for me. We can talk, get to know each other properly. When you are ready, if you are ready, we can go into town and find the preacher. But not before." Adelaide walked to the rocking chair and sat down carefully, as if testing whether it would hold her. "I have never met anyone like you, Yates Caldwell. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" The smallest hint of a smile touched her lips. "I think it might be a very good thing." Over the next several days, they settled into a careful routine. Yates rose before dawn to tend the horses and do the ranch work. Adelaide explored the cabin and the immediate area, finding her bearings. They took meals together, breakfast and supper, sitting at the rough wooden table and talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who took in sewing. He told her about learning to break horses from his father, about the harsh Nevada winters and the blazing summers, about his dreams of expanding the ranch someday. The trembling that had seized her on the train platform gradually eased, though Yates noticed she still startled easily at loud noises. She was a good cook, better than he had hoped, turning his basic supplies into meals that actually had flavor. She also proved to have a quick wit that surprised him. On the third evening, when he came in covered in dust from working with a particularly stubborn horse, she took one look at him and said, "I hope the horse looks worse than you do." "The horse looks immaculate. I look like I got dragged behind the wagon. That is what I was afraid of." He laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. She smiled too, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. On the fourth day, Adelaide asked to see the horses up close. Yates led her to the corral where he kept his gentlest mares. She approached cautiously, but when a dappled gray mare nuzzled her palm, Adelaide laughed with pure delight. "She is so soft. That is Bella. She was my mother's favorite." Yates came to stand beside her, showing her how to stroke the mare's neck properly. "She is getting old now, but she is sweet-tempered. Did your mother ride much, every day when she could? She said it was the only time she felt truly free." He paused, the old grief rising up. "She would have liked you." Adelaide looked up at him. "You really think so? I know so." "She always said I needed someone who was not afraid to speak her mind." He grinned. "Took you a few days, but you are getting there." She blushed but did not look away. "It is easier when I am less frightened." "Are you still frightened?" "A little, but more of making the wrong choice than of you." She turned back to the mare, running her hand along Bella's mane. "What if I cannot handle this life? What if I fail? Then we figure it out together. Adelaide, I am not expecting you to be perfect. I am just hoping we can be partners." The word seemed to mean something to her. She nodded slowly, still stroking the horse. "Partners, I like that." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains orange and pink, Adelaide said quietly, "I would like to marry you, Yates, if the offer is still open." His heart jumped, but he kept his voice steady. "Are you sure? You have only been here for days." "I am sure. You are a good man, and this is a good place. I think we could build something real here." She met his eyes. "And I think maybe you need someone to matter to you as much as I need to matter to someone." He reached over and took her hand, the first time he had done so since helping her from the wagon. Her fingers were slender and work-worn in his calloused palm. "Then we will go to town tomorrow and find Reverend Mitchell." "Tomorrow?" Her eyes widened. "Unless you want to wait longer." She shook her head. "No, I think if we wait, I might get frightened again and talk myself out of it. We cannot have that." He squeezed her hand gently. "Adelaide, I will do my best to make you happy. That is my promise to you. And I promise to be a true partner to you. To work beside you and stand with you, whatever comes." They sat there until the stars came out, hands linked, neither wanting to break the moment. When they finally went inside, Yates to gather his things and return to the barn, Adelaide stopped him at the door. "Thank you for waiting for me. Not just on the platform, but for giving me time to find my footing. You were worth waiting for." The wedding took place the next afternoon in Reverend Mitchell's small church. The preacher's wife served as witness, along with the general store owner who happened to be making a delivery. It was simple and brief, but when Yates slipped the thin gold band on Adelaide's finger and the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, something profound shifted in the air between them. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Mitchell said with a kind smile. Yates leaned down slowly, giving Adelaide time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Their lips met softly, briefly, but it was enough to seal the commitment they had made. When they pulled apart, Adelaide's cheeks were pink, but she was smiling. They celebrated with a simple supper at the town's only restaurant, a meal of roast beef and potatoes that Adelaide barely touched because her stomach was too full of butterflies. Yates told her stories about the town's characters, making her laugh despite her nerves. When they finally climbed back into the wagon for the ride home, the sun was setting once again. "Are you all right?" Yates asked as they left Belmont behind. "I am married," Adelaide said wonderingly. "I am actually married, having regrets already." "No." "Just amazed at how quickly life can change. A week ago, I was living with my aunt, being reminded daily that I was an imposition. Now I am someone's wife. Not just someone's, mine." The possessiveness in his tone surprised them both. "I mean that in the best way. You belong here now, Adelaide. This is your home." She leaned against his shoulder carefully, and he shifted the reins to one hand so he could put his arm around her. They rode the rest of the way like that, pressed together, both nervous and excited about what the night would bring. When they reached the ranch, Yates helped Adelaide down from the wagon and then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. She gasped and grabbed his neck. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold? It is tradition." "But what about your back?" he laughed. "You barely weigh anything. I throw hay bales heavier than you." He carried her inside and set her down gently in the main room. The fire he had laid before they left was burning low, casting warm shadows on the walls. Adelaide stood uncertainly, twisting the new ring on her finger. "I should probably confess something," she said quietly. Yates tensed slightly. "What is it?" "I have never been with a man before. I do not really know what I am supposed to do." The relief that flooded through him was palpable. "Adelaide, we do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready. Being married does not mean we have to rush." "But is not that part of marriage? What husbands and wives do?" "It is. But it is also something that should happen when both people want it, not because they feel obligated." He took her hands in his. "I want our marriage to be built on more than duty. I want you to want me the same way I want you." She looked up at him, her brown eyes searching his face. "I do want you. I am just nervous." "Then we go slow. We have the rest of our lives, Adelaide. There is no need to rush anything." They compromised that night. They shared the bed, but Yates kept his clothes on except for his boots and shirt, staying in his undershirt and trousers. Adelaide wore a modest nightgown she had brought from Philadelphia. They lay beside each other, talking softly in the darkness until Adelaide's words grew slower and her breathing evened out. Yates lay awake a while longer, marveling at the warmth of another person beside him after so many years alone, before sleep finally claimed him too. The next weeks were a period of adjustment and discovery. Adelaide threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing new curtains from fabric Yates bought in town, organizing the kitchen to her liking, planting a small garden near the creek. Yates taught her to ride, starting with gentle Bella and gradually building her confidence. She had a natural seat and quickly learned to handle the mare. They continued to share the bed, growing more comfortable with each other's presence. Yates would pull Adelaide close at night, and she began to relax into his embrace instead of lying stiff and nervous. Sometimes they talked until dawn broke. Other times they simply held each other, content in the silence. It was Adelaide who finally initiated more. 3 weeks after their wedding, as they lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, she rolled over to face him and placed her hand on his chest. "I am ready," she whispered. "I want to be your wife in every way." Yates cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." "I trust you, Yates." He kissed her then deeply, and felt her respond with a passion that had been building beneath her reserved exterior. Their wedding night, delayed but all the sweeter for it, was tender and careful. Yates took his time, showing Adelaide with his hands and mouth and body how much she meant to him. She was nervous at first, but his gentleness eased her fears, and when they finally came together completely, it felt like the true sealing of their vows. Afterward, Adelaide lay with her head on Yates's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "Is it always like that?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like the world narrowed down to just the two of us, like nothing else existed." He smiled and pressed a kiss to her hair. "If you are lucky and with the right person, yes, it can be like that." "Then I am very lucky indeed." Their marriage deepened from that night forward. The physical intimacy seemed to unlock a new level of emotional closeness. Adelaide became bolder in expressing her opinions, and Yates found he loved the spirited debates they would have over supper. She had a sharp mind and was not afraid to challenge him when she thought he was wrong. At the same time, she was learning the rhythms of ranch life and proving to be a capable partner. Autumn arrived with its cool winds and golden light. The ranch work grew more intense as they prepared for winter, cutting and storing hay, repairing buildings, bringing the horses in closer. Adelaide worked alongside Yates, learning to mend tack and help with feeding. Her hands grew calloused, and her skin tanned despite her bonnet. She was transforming from the pale, trembling woman who had stepped off the train into someone hardy and strong. One October afternoon, Yates came in from working with the horses to find Adelaide sitting at the table, staring at her hands with an odd expression on her face. "What is wrong?" he asked, concerned. She looked up, and he saw tears on her cheeks. His stomach dropped. "Adelaide, what happened?" "I think I am with child." The world seemed to stop spinning. Yates crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her chair. "Are you sure?" "I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and this morning I was sick. My mother told me those were the signs." Fresh tears spilled over. "I am sorry. I know we have only been married a few months. The timing is terrible with winter coming." "Sorry, Adelaide, why would you be sorry?" He took her hands in his. "This is wonderful news." "You are not angry, I am thrilled, scared out of my mind, but thrilled." He pulled her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby, Adelaide." She clung to him, and he realized her tears were not from sadness but from overwhelming emotion. "I am frightened," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this? Then we will face it together, just like everything else. You are the strongest woman I know, Adelaide. If anyone can do this, you can." He pulled back to look at her. "And you will not be alone. I will be right here beside you every step of the way." The next months were both wonderful and challenging. Adelaide's sickness continued through the first few months of pregnancy, leaving her exhausted and unable to keep much food down. Yates took over more of the household work, cooking simple meals and tending to Adelaide when she needed it. Winter arrived in full force, blanketing the valley in snow and confining them mostly to the cabin. But there were beautiful moments, too. The first time Yates felt the baby move beneath his hand, he was struck speechless with wonder. Adelaide laughed at his expression and guided his hand to feel the flutter again. They spent long winter evenings by the fire, Yates reading aloud from the few books they owned while Adelaide sewed tiny garments. They debated names endlessly, finally settling on James if it was a boy and Alina if it was a girl. When spring finally arrived, and Adelaide's belly was round and prominent, Yates insisted on bringing the doctor out from Belmont to check on her. Dr. Harrison was an older man with kind eyes who examined Adelaide thoroughly and declared both mother and baby healthy. "When do you think the baby will come?" Yates asked. "Late April or early May, I would say. Your wife is strong and healthy. I see no reason for complications." He turned to Adelaide. "But I want you to take it easy this last month. No heavy lifting or long walks. Rest as much as you can." Adelaide chafed at the restrictions but obeyed. Yates became fiercely protective, barely letting her do anything. She teased him about it, calling him a mother hen, but she was secretly touched by his devotion. The baby arrived on a warm April evening, 2 days after Adelaide's first contraction started. It was a long, difficult labor that left Yates feeling helpless and terrified. He held Adelaide's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and whispered encouragement even as he prayed desperately that she would survive. The doctor had stayed at the ranch, and his calm presence was the only thing keeping Yates from falling apart. When the baby's first cry finally split the air, Yates felt his knees go weak with relief. Dr. Harrison held up a squalling, red-faced infant. "You have a son." Adelaide, exhausted and pale but alive, reached for the baby with trembling arms. The doctor placed the tiny bundle on her chest, and Adelaide burst into tears. Yates knelt beside the bed, one arm around his wife and the other gently touching his son's tiny head. "He is perfect," Adelaide whispered. "Yates, look at him. He is perfect, just like his mother." Yates kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "Thank you, Adelaide. Thank you for him, for everything." They named him James Everett Caldwell, and he became the center of their world. Yates discovered a capacity for love he had not known he possessed, amazed daily by his son's tiny fingers and toes, by the way the baby would grip his finger with surprising strength. Adelaide bloomed in motherhood despite the exhaustion, finding joy in nursing and caring for their child. Summer brought new challenges as they adjusted to life with an infant while still managing the ranch. Yates hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavier work so he could spend more time with Adelaide and James. Money was tight, but they made it work. Adelaide took to bringing James outside in a basket while she worked in the garden, and Yates loved coming in from the corrals to find his wife singing softly to their son. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with James asleep in Adelaide's arms, Yates reflected on how much had changed in just over a year. The trembling woman who had stepped off the train had become this confident, capable mother and wife. The lonely ranch had become a home filled with love and laughter. "What are you thinking about?" Adelaide asked, noticing his expression, about how lucky I am, about how different my life would be if you had not gotten on that train. I almost did not, she admitted. I stood at the station in Philadelphia for an hour, too frightened to buy the ticket. Finally, a woman asked me what I was so afraid of. I told her I was terrified of going west to marry a stranger. She said, "What is waiting for you here if you stay?" I realized the answer was nothing. So I bought the ticket. Remind me to thank that woman if we ever go to Philadelphia. Adelaide laughed. We are never going to Philadelphia. Probably not, but I am still grateful to her. He reached over and touched James's soft cheek. Are you happy, Adelaide? Truly. Happier than I ever imagined possible. This life is hard sometimes, but it is ours. That makes all the difference. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Yates's reputation for training quality horses spread, and he began getting orders from as far away as San Francisco. Adelaide managed the household and books with quiet efficiency, proving to have a head for numbers. They added on to the cabin, creating a real bedroom for themselves and a small room for James. It was not fancy, but it was comfortable and filled with love. When James was 3, Adelaide became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, knowing what to expect. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their second child arrived on a cold November morning, it was a daughter they named Elena Rose. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Yates would find him standing by her cradle, singing the songs Adelaide had sung to him. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growing. James learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, showing his father's natural way with horses. Elena was quieter but fierce in her own way, unafraid of anything. They added 2 more children over the years, another son named Thomas, and finally another daughter named Margaret. The cabin grew crowded but happy, filled with the noise and chaos of family life. Through it all, Yates and Adelaide's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course. Adelaide's temper could flare when Yates made decisions without consulting her, and Yates sometimes grew stubborn when he thought he knew best. But they learned to talk through their problems, to forgive quickly and love fiercely. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Adelaide into Belmont for a rare night away from the children, who stayed with a neighboring rancher's family. They had dinner at the restaurant where they had celebrated their wedding, and afterward walked through the quiet streets in the warm summer darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Answering that advertisement, coming all this way?" Adelaide stopped walking and turned to face him. The moonlight caught in her dark hair, now threaded with a few strands of silver. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. A home, a family, a purpose. How could I regret any of that? I was so nervous when I went to meet your train. I kept thinking, what if she takes one look at me and gets right back on board? I was too frightened to even consider that option. I could barely think at all." She smiled at the memory. "But then you said you had been waiting for me, and something in the way you said it made me think maybe everything would be all right. I meant every word. I had been waiting for you, Adelaide. I just did not know it until I saw you standing there, trembling and brave and beautiful." He pulled her close. "You are still all those things, still beautiful, still brave, still mine. Always yours, just as you are always mine." They kissed there in the moonlit street, not caring if anyone saw. 2 people who had taken a chance on each other and built something lasting from it. More years passed. James grew into a capable young man who took on more responsibility for the ranch, allowing Yates to slow down as his joints grew stiffer. Elena married a neighboring rancher's son in a wedding that had Adelaide crying happy tears. Thomas showed a talent for breaking difficult horses, patient and gentle like his father. Margaret, their youngest, surprised everyone by developing a passion for books and declaring her intention to become a teacher. Yates and Adelaide watched their children grow and flourish, taking pride in the people they were becoming. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and when he married a spirited young woman named Sarah, Yates and Adelaide helped them build a house on the far side of the property. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The cabin and yard were filled with children and grandchildren, laughter and music. Adelaide, now in her early 40s, moved through the crowd making sure everyone had enough to eat. Yates watched her from the porch, marveling as always at this woman who had changed his entire world. James came to stand beside his father. "You look content." "I am. More than I ever thought possible." Yates nodded toward Adelaide. "Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me. I hope Sarah and I can build what you and Ma have. It seems rare what you two have together." It did not happen overnight. It took work and patience and forgiveness, but it was worth every moment. Yates clapped his son on the shoulder. "You and Sarah will find your own way. Just remember to be partners. That is what your mother and I have always been, through everything. Partners." As the sun set that evening and the last guests departed, Yates and Adelaide stood together watching the stars emerge. Adelaide leaned against her husband's chest, his arms wrapped around her. 20 years, she murmured. "It seems impossible that so much time has passed. Best 20 years of my life. Mine too. Though I must admit, that day I stepped off the train, I could not have imagined any of this. I was so frightened. I know. I could see you shaking from across the platform." He tightened his arms around her. "But you were brave enough to step off anyway. That is what has always amazed me about you, Adelaide, your courage." "I am not sure it was courage, more like desperation. I had nowhere else to go. Maybe it started that way. But staying, building this life with me, raising our children in this harsh land, that takes real courage. You could have gone back east at any time. You chose to stay." She turned in his arms to face him. "Because this is where my heart is." "You are where my heart is. It has been that way since those first few days when I realized you were nothing like I expected. You were better. I love you, Adelaide Caldwell, more now than the day we married, and I will love you more still with every day that comes. And I love you, Yates. Always and forever." They kissed as they had on their wedding day, as they had 1,000 times since. A kiss that held 20 years of shared joys and sorrows, of passion and partnership, of a love that had started with a trembling woman and a waiting man, and had grown into something unshakable. The years continued to unfold. Yates eventually turned the ranch operations fully over to James, content to spend his days helping where needed but mostly enjoying his grandchildren and time with Adelaide. They took long walks together when the weather permitted, rode out to their favorite spot by the creek, and sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. When Yates was 65 and Adelaide 60, they celebrated their 35th anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. Their children had offered to host a party, but they had declined, wanting this time alone together. 35 years, Adelaide said, raising her glass of wine. "We have been together longer than we were apart." "Here is to 35 more," Yates replied, touching his glass to hers. "I am not sure we will make it to 95 and 90, Adelaide laughed, "but I appreciate the optimism." "Then here is to however many years we have left. May they all be spent together." "I will drink to that." They sipped their wine and ate the meal Adelaide had prepared, Yates's favorite beef stew with fresh bread. Afterward, they moved to the porch as they did most evenings, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring air. "Do you remember what you said to me on the train platform?" Adelaide asked. "The very first words, I asked if you were Adelaide Thorne. After that, Yates smiled. I said I had been waiting for you. I have thought about those words so many times over the years, how much they meant to me in that moment when I was so frightened, how they gave me the courage to stay. She reached for his hand. I hope you know I was waiting for you too, even if I did not realize it at the time. I was waiting for someone to see me, to value me, to build a life with me. You were all those things and more. We found each other when we both needed it most. I call that providence, or luck, or love. Adelaide laughed. Love came later. First was necessity and hope and a willingness to take a chance. But it became love, real, lasting love. That is what matters. Yes, Adelaide agreed softly. That is what matters. As darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had built a life from nothing but courage and hope, and eventually love. The ranch spread out around them, no longer just Yates's but theirs together, and their children's and their grandchildren's. A legacy built on the foundation of a frightened woman stepping off a train and a lonely man waiting on a platform. The years were kind to them in the end. They both lived to see all their children married and settled, to hold great-grandchildren in their arms. Yates passed first, at the age of 73, dying peacefully in his sleep with Adelaide beside him. She mourned him deeply, but without regret, grateful for every year they had shared. Adelaide lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the early days and keeping Yates's memory alive. She never remarried, content to have had one great love in her lifetime. When she passed at 78, it was in the bedroom of the cabin that had been her home for over 50 years, surrounded by family. They buried her beside Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and family they had built together. At the funeral, James spoke about his parents' love story, about the courage it took for his mother to travel across the country to marry a stranger, about the devotion his father had shown her every day of their marriage. They were partners in the truest sense, James said. They built this ranch together, raised us together, faced every challenge together. What they had was rare and precious, and we are all blessed to have witnessed it. My father used to say that the best decision he ever made was sending for a mail-order bride. My mother always said the best decision she ever made was getting off that train. I think they were both right. Years later, when James was an old man himself, he would tell his grandchildren about the day his mother arrived in Belmont, trembling and frightened but brave enough to step off the train anyway. He told them about his father's words, "I have been waiting for you," and how those simple words had started a love story that spanned decades and shaped all their lives. The ranch itself continued for generations, always called the Caldwell place, always home to descendants of Yates and Adelaide. The cabin was eventually replaced with a larger house, but they kept the original structure as a sort of monument. Couples getting married in the family would sometimes spend their wedding night there, honoring the tradition of Yates and Adelaide. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold, embellished and remembered. But at its heart, it remained a simple tale of two lonely people who took a chance on each other and built something beautiful from that act of faith. A woman brave enough to travel into the unknown, and a man patient enough to wait for her to find her courage. A love that started with trembling and whispered words and grew into something unshakable and eternal. In the end, that is what they left behind, more than land or wealth or even family. They left the legacy of their love, proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step off the train, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, "I have been waiting for you." And sometimes, if you are very lucky, Those moments of courage and those simple words can be the beginning of forever.